Perfect.
There we go.
Excellent. Great. Good evening, all. Quick audio check. We'll get rolling in just a moment.
Can you hear me?
We can hear you perfectly.
Awesome.
Excellent. Good to see some familiar names logging in. Some of which we'll be seeing next week, which is great. Perfect. Well, without further ado, good afternoon, good evening, and good night across the country here. It's a privilege. This is our third iteration of our Sinclair CE series, and this one is particularly top of mind for a lot of clinicians these days, which is, my God, what of a whirlwind have we gone through? And, we've weathered the storm, production's coming back up, right? Staffing issues remain, but now, how do we help to look at the opportunities out there? There is growth, right? The condos are going up, people are coming in, immigration continues to come through across the country. So maybe is it time to build and move from an associate to opening my first clinic? Is it time to expand and move into that adjacent suite? Right? Or potentially move down the street because that landlord's mortgage has gone up dramatically and they are desperate at finding a fantastic tenant such as a dentist. So thank you all for joining. We're going to have some fun, a great interactive course, and some great conversations. So the Q&A is open. We will be issuing CEs for the live attendees for tonight's course, and that gives us about 10 days to process those. And also really excited about our two guest speakers tonight. Duncan Stanley is someone I've had the privilege of knowing for quite some time and has 35 years of experience in the dental office and, more importantly, on the Sinclair side. So probably no better expert with over 500 builds, expansions, etc. Yeah, come on. But truly a privilege, Duncan. Thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me, Eric. Yeah, it's gonna be fun. So
that's great. And what I'm going to put you on the spot, Duncan. What would you say are some of the biggest changes you've seen in the dental industry from 35 years ago?
technology. Yeah. The days of the first intraoral camera literally weighing 80 pounds and having to be on a cart, the size of a grocery cart, and you'd wheel it in. And now $2,000 gets you an amazing thing that plugs into your computer. You don't even think about it anymore. But yeah, technology. And still the technology bringing the smiles to the faces of no matter what the age of the clinician. CAD/CAM, 3D printing. My own dentist, I won't bring up his name, but I remember selling him his 2D pan. And he was so reluctant, and finally his film-based one broke down. He was not an early adopter, and then the transformation and the smile on his face when he realized the advantages. So yeah, just the continuing, ongoing, blossoming technology available. That's the big stage.
Great. And we were just sharing some great stories of your wild motorcycle rides throughout the Western U.S. and glad we got you back home and safe and sound. And now we can now you can, as the official largest Calgary Flames fan on the planet. Is that the other title beyond regional manager for the Calgary office?
Might be fair. That might be fair. Yeah. Corey might argue that, but yeah.
That's okay. We'll keep him in the waiting room here.
All right.
And then of course, Jason Yim, one of our senior consultants here at Cirrus, who's had the privilege of working with Corey and many across the country to help support doctors and just having the right conversations about growth, production per chair? Are we at the 250,000 production per chair threshold to contemplate looking at adding that fifth or sixth operatory? So for those of you joining by phone, we are sharing a few things at a very high level. Q&A is open, chat's open, guys. We'll help to cover some of these as we go. If you are joining, it does show that there's an interest in growth. There's an interest in how can we grow? How can we grow profitably? And especially as it pertains to the office. If I want to relocate, do I want to buy my next location? Do I want to lease it? What does the landscape look like? Jason has been spending decades advising individuals and business owners on the financial sides of major decisions, and is one of our senior consultants and has spoken to hundreds of doctors specifically about this topic. So, and myself as the owner of Cirrus Consulting Group, looking forward to, again, going through some great best practices and doing a nice high-level course. Okay. Jason, from a high level, if we can pull up the poll, we'll customize some of the content for this evening, guys. There's been no shortage of good content, webinars, etc. But tell us a little bit about what situation you're in. Are you currently in a space that you own or you lease? Right? Give us a little bit of information about what describes your current situation. And typically, we see about usually about 2 out of 10 are planning to open or get in that relocation of the clinic from a new deal perspective. There's still a surge and still incredibly high prices for acquiring a clinic. Also, many starting to think that somewhere between yesterday and tomorrow to transition. So if you're planning to transition in the next 5 years, right? Or to say, hey, Eric, I've just weathered the storm, Duncan. I just want to stay, right, and ride out the next 5, 10 years, make some strategic investments, right, and go from there. Leverage will be a key theme for this evening. So where does it stand if you are on a lease? Do you own? Is your lease coming up in 2 years, month to month, 2 to 5 years? We see a lot of doctors making some uninformed decisions about their transitions, and we want to be very conscious from start to finish about that. In addition, are you to the stage where you're looking to start or buy a practice? Perfect. On that note, we'll jump through and let's jump in. So, and also, if I didn't mention it earlier, Zev is the regional sales manager for Sinclair for the Winnipeg office. And thanks again for joining us, Zev. All right. Next up, so bit of an overview for today. If you move to the next one, Jay. So the purpose of tonight is to help ensure that we're dealing with the unique questions, which is, Duncan, is it the right time? Gosh, is it a recession? There's the US politics going on. There's the Canadian craziness going on, right? There's no shortage of things across the news. There's doom and gloom. There's yet at the same time, we're seeing the Canadian Dental Plan program. What does this mean for us? What does this mean for the clinic? And how should we take note as to what's going on today? So Duncan, maybe to put you on the spot there, as you're meeting with clinicians across the province, what are you sharing with them in terms of what you're seeing across the country, across the province? How are you advising a lot of your clients with all these changes these days and best practices?
I honestly believe that the best investment a dentist can make, no matter where they are in their parabola of their career, is to invest in either a practice or invest in your practice. And there you can buy, you can build, but if you don't own one, and owning isn't for everyone, but if you're thinking about it, the time is always now. Do it now. I don't think I have talked to a dentist that has ever regretted the timing of when they ended up doing it. And you're going to have ups, you're going to have downs, but can you time the stock market? No, you just got to get in, and hopefully you're in it for the long term. Because if you want to build and flip, that's a different story. But I don't think that's generally what we're talking about here.
Yeah, it's a key point because look, there is so much inundation for associates, and it's been a tough time to be an associate. But it's more complicated today to build it a practice than it was 5 years ago, than it was 5 years prior to that, than it was 5 years prior to that, as you mentioned. So,
Yeah.
the again, takeaway from today is to not to make everybody an expert on growth and investment, and especially as it pertains to the lease and real estate, but more so how do we help to take the first step? How do we help to assemble the team? How do we see some quick best practices and to maybe add a little bit of empowerment? Because as we'll touch on, you doctors, right, regardless of what the real estate broker, the landlord, or otherwise will tell you, you are the best tenant on the planet, right? You have the highest build out costs of any other commercial tenant on the planet. You have some of the lowest default rates at less than 5%, where a restaurant we see well over 90% default rates. So it becomes then this perfect storm where you can't work from home regardless of what your staff says, right? And lastly, you're always bringing in high quality foot traffic and in the same location for 26 and a half years. So
Is
from that,
that what the average is there? 26 and a
yeah,
half?
yeah,
Yeah, that
exactly.
makes sense.
And most will open two clinics on average, and let it be a relocation, let it be a second location in their careers. So at some point, unfortunately, many doctors are getting to the point of looking to sell. And because of the landlords across the country, they're adding in demolition clauses, they're adding in relocation clauses, they're adding in lack of term or options. And these days, the banks just got off the phone with an RBC client, and the banks will not issue a long-term loan if there's insufficient term on the lease. So, if there is a pending redevelopment, to Duncan's point, it's a great opportunity to start thinking about that early versus later and down the line, because the last thing you want to do is on the last few years of your career to have to go through the whole build out just to sell.
Yeah.
Perfect.
Yeah,
Jason?
and that's a really good point on the having term left on the lease. It's not just for wanting to expand or relocate, but when you eventually want to sell, it's not financeable without a lease in place.
Yeah, and that's interesting because you're right. 35 years ago, when you started, the financing world was very different. Banks were giving money in very different ways. And unfortunately, because many banks got burned because of landlords' leases, lack of term, doctor got $1 million to buy the clinic, right? Suddenly, then 3 years later, they're forced to move across the street. They need another 400,000 bucks. And suddenly the bank says, well, that's got to stop. So,
Yeah.
that's key. And, for those of you that haven't heard of us before or joined one of our webinars, welcome. We, Cirrus, have been around now for over 30 years. We've done over 13,000 of these, principally dental lease office negotiations, and we're unique. So we're always remunerated directly from the doctor. We were founded back in Alberta, ironically, in August of 1994. So just about the time that Duncan was hitting his stride. So we're now our 30th year anniversary this month, which is rare for any business, but very humbly, we were, again, founded by a group of doctors, partnered with some real estate experts to make sure that doctors had the proper representation. And being so specific, we have really become the only healthcare specialized tenant advisory and lease negotiation firm of our kind. So again, we're not being paid by the landlord, right? And we really become that sweet spot to ensure that you've got the proper understanding, representation, handling all of that landlord stuff in between. On the next one, Duncan, lots of key things with Sinclair, lots of things that are new, acquisitions and otherwise. Duncan, do you want to touch on what's new with Sinclair?
Sure, I can quickly mention. So Sinclair, after being a Canadian family-owned company for the first 34 and a half years or whatever it was, uh, um, that I was with them. In February, we were acquired by a company called Medline. They are still a family-owned company, but they are American-based. But as our president said, it's kind of like having the huge gorilla purchasing power behind us. And so it's been a really fun 6 months so far. I think it's just ticked over 6 months. And it brought a lot of bulk purchasing power that we were able to pass along to our clients, that we thought that we had good pricing before, and now we realize the advantage of having a $20 billion company behind us. So the purchasing power has been amazing, but also their surgical line of equipment that we didn't have access to, the dental companies didn't have access to. So if anybody's looking at doing a surgical room in their clinic, that's something that we now have access to. Those are a couple of things that have come along in the last 6 months, and they continue to bring advantages to us. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, that's key points. We're seeing a lot more of that as well. We are seeing some more sedation, deep sedation,
Yeah,
recovery rooms, etc. Right? The
yeah,
oral maxillofacial surgeons coming through and traveling or utilizing those in an existing GP type office,
yeah,
where typically you're right, it wouldn't have been thought of before, and here we are now.
yeah,
Yeah, and that's a whole other interesting revenue stream, because when you think about all the impacted thirds or otherwise that get referred out, when actually
yeah,
maybe that can be done in-house, which can dramatically increase revenue in preparation for a great sale. So again, our privilege to be doing these CE courses. We've been at it now for 30 years, and again, we do hundreds of these each and every year across the continent. So data becomes a key piece. So Jason, to the next, let's talk about data. So as we look through any sort of doctor that's thinking of expanding, renovating, relocating, etc., data becomes key. So one of the key investments that we've done here is not only our own proprietary data of roughly 20,000 leases we have on file, but also all the license data. So what we have is, and as we work with our clients for any reviews or rental rates or demographics, 95 billion square feet. So let it be through Alberta, Vancouver, Ottawa, Toronto, Barrie, Ontario, or otherwise, right? Knowing rental rates, vacancies, comp reports is key. So Jason, maybe to cover some of the data you pulled in preparation for tonight.
Yes, absolutely. So, one thing I wanted to mention as well is, you know, some of the items that I'll show you here, they're predictions based on future performance. They can be hard to predict, but they give you a good sense of some of the trends that we're seeing in some of the markets in Canada. What we're seeing recently is that rents they're on the rise. That's for sure in some markets, whereas in others, especially when it comes to, for example, the office real estate, rents have dropped significantly, right? And vacancies are on the rise as well. So, frankly, it's never been a better time to be a tenant in the space. It's Slate Properties in Toronto. They've recently had some issues with some of their real estate. Brookfield, one of the largest landlords in North America, they recently defaulted on two towers in Los Angeles. It's totaling over $500 million, right? So some of these, especially with these larger entities, when it comes to being beholden to the shareholders, they're frankly they're looking to ensure that their revenue stream, i.e., their rent, is coming in, and many of them are looking to do more deals than ever. So when you're thinking about either doing a new build or if you're looking to expand, if you got a vacancy beside you and you could use some more room, frankly, right now could be a fantastic time to initiate a conversation with the landlord to make that happen. Right. Some of the other data that we'll utilize when it comes to helping you decide on if you want to, if this is the right decision, if you want to build in a particular spots. You know, if this is the right part of the city to build in, is this the right city to build in? You know, how's my location look demographically? If you're doing more peds work, you know, what's the proportion of younger people in the area compared to the older population? This is part of the data that we'll utilize to help you make an informed decision, which I think, Duncan, you had touched on earlier in terms of,
Yeah.
yeah,
Can you quickly go back to the last slide, if that's okay?
yeah, absolutely.
So, you know, if we look at the market rates, and they're going up in every city, but it's actually a fairly narrow band, right? I mean, the chart makes it look like it's a little bit more than it really is, right? Because let's look at Vancouver, right? We're starting 6 years ago, or 5 years ago at 45, and we're at 52. It's gone up, but I just wanted to point out that, you know, timing, rates are going up, and they have been going up, and they will continue to go up. But really, it's not that much of a increase that you should try and say, oh, I'm not going to do it now because you know, the vacancy rate's this, or the actual rate is that. You know, go to Calgary. What have we got? 27 to 31 in 5 years. That's really not. Sure, it's an increase, but it's not a reason or not an impediment to signing a lease now. Anyway, I just wanted to point out, because the blue line makes it look like, hey, lease rates have gone up, but everybody just have a look at the baseline in your particular city. You know, we're only showing the last 5 years and showing a baseline there. So the other thing I wanted to say was, so if we can go to the next slide, and I'm not trying to hijack the the webinar, but
No,
I was when I've sat in on the amount of information and the demographics and the statistics that you guys pull on even drilling down into a particular building. Like I've seen other companies with their data, and they have nothing like what you guys have. So if anybody's considering this kind of information alone is invaluable. So I just wanted to put that out there. Zev? Oh, I thought Zev had something coming on. Anyway.
I saw him unmute as well.
Yeah. Okay.
So yeah, no, appreciate that, Duncan. It's true, because look, data is power. And for those associates are recently out of school or contemplating, hey, is it the right time? Why? What's next, etc. Yes, it is key. And there'll be a little section at the end. You can request your specific demographic rental rate review report from it. So it's helpful to know what's the market size. The banks want to know it. You should know that as well. You know, what's the household growth? What's the population growth? What does that growth rate look like on the left-hand side? You know, to say, hey, Duncan, you know what, I don't know if I'm contemplating, I might want to be doing a lot more Invisalign. I might want to bring in, you know, a orthodontist once or twice a week, right? How many, you know, or maybe I want to bring in, do some more peds work, etc., right? What does the sub 18 market look like on again, the left-hand side? All those population pyramids we had from high school are just as applicable today as you think about where to make strategic investments into your business, or right into the next location, household income, right, marital statuses. What type of group are you focusing on? Are you a new doctor that's going to be accepting the new Canadian Federal Dental Plan, right? And if so, right, what does that local market look like? So yes, as part of our process, we usually go through this, even on the very first conversation, to help get a better understanding and make sure that you've got the data to make the proper decisions, that look, this is not something that, you know, Duncan, you open a new clinic today, you open the door and say, maybe I wanted to move across the street, right? It just doesn't quite work out that way.
Yeah.
No.
Eric, can you hear me now?
Yeah, Zeb, gotcha.
Well, okay, perfect. Yeah. No, I was going to say, we've been doing this recently with a lot of other commercial, commercial companies, and they're not dental specific. They do provide some data, but I think this is the, benefit of you guys being specific, is you are dental specific. You do know what dentists are looking for when they're looking for a space, the demographics they need, the questions to look for. So just following with Dunk is because I've just done this recently with another customer, this is some of the best information we've seen.
Yeah, appreciate that. And then Zev, anything else to guidance you're giving to your clients now across Manitoba in terms of those discovery questions, advice, guidance, again, those contemplating expansion, investment, building second locations, or even just simply renewing their leases? Any other best practices you're seeing across Manitoba?
Yeah, right now, what I'm seeing is we have a lot of people who space is opening beside them and they're just jumping on it because you never know when that space is going to open again for you, or if someone else takes it, they'll never have that opportunity again to expand. So a lot of what we've done recently have been expansions in that scenario. And everyone I talk to, every dentist says, I think there's been some where there's been partners involved where some of the partners did not feel comfortable yet about doing it because it just comes up, the space comes up and they're not ready for it. And the dentists say, you just have to jump on it because you never know when you'll have the opportunity again. And especially if it's a growing practice, right? It's not always for everyone, but it's when that opportunity comes, you may not have it again. So that's one thing. I do have a lot of dentists who are, looking to build and then stop because of the interest rates. That's always, we're talking about the rates going up, but a couple things consider is the costs are only going up as well, right? So you might wait for however many years for these rates to come down, but then the cost of this build out, the equipment has gone up that it may not have even made sense for you to wait, and especially I have friends who are doing, variable mortgages on houses. They're like, this is the best time, like, to be a variable at this point when you're at the top, because we know these rates are only going down, right? So it is scary. I could tell with the markets and how things are, but I mean, there's never a great time. There's just always a good time for you to do it. You've got to do that, take that risk.
Yeah, it's a good point because again, the purpose of today is call a bit of empowerment, best practices, etc. That expansion, let's touch on that for a little bit. And Jay, you can jump onto the next slide as well. It becomes important because as you contemplate the expansion, don't forget, landlords just care about two things, term and rent, right? So as you're contemplating becoming twice the size, most dentists, in our experience, don't leverage their leverage because landlords will, in many cases, jump through hoops to help secure a larger anchor tenant. The bigger they are, the more they spend. That's the name of the game. So as the doctor changes from a 1,500 to a 3,000 square foot space and takes over the unit beside them, yes. So from a lease negotiation perspective, we call it a blend and extend. So one of the mistakes some doctors make is they'll sign a new lease for the one next door. So now your existing lease, Zev, expires in 5 years from now. Your new lease expires in 8 years from now or whatnot. So you're now always stuck into this sort of ladder of a lease expiries. And the landlord's got you because when you go to renew one versus the other, right? We renew a rate here, we've got a rate here, we've got a term, and they've got you. So definitely it's a perfect time to say, look, forget about the old lease. Let's look at a net new 10-year term, not only for my existing space, but also the new space. Let's do either a coterminous lease or one new lease for the full 3,000 or whatever, 3,500, 5,000 square feet. And now let's talk some turkey because build out costs now roughly, Zev and Winnipeg and Duncan. What are you seeing now in terms of landlords, timings, fixturings, build outs? Duncan, you've done hundreds and hundreds of these over the last 35 years. What are you seeing now for build outs and sort of rough costs and timelines in Calgary?
It used to be you could get it for $40 a square foot, and now that might be the cost of your flooring. So 250, 280, 300, 320 per square foot, depending on what kind of finishing you want to put into it. But now you're probably looking at the 275, 280 for something that most people would consider presentable, but not over the top in Calgary. And we used to say 60 days, then we were at 90 days, now it's 120 to 150 days build out. It's the rare project that gets done in 120 days
Mhm.
now.
I think a couple of years you could have done build outs for around 200 or so per square foot, and now they're easily 275 to 325 is kind of a great range to kind of look at.
Yeah.
Plus the gear, right? So you're
Mhm.
you know, for new build that can be $1 million out the door, right?
Easy.
Mhm.
Yeah. So again, we share this, you know, not to be surprising, not to be alarmist or otherwise, but to help educate each of you that are contemplating making the expansion. You know, there's fantastic resources out there, great accountants to help make this work. The banks still to this day will fall all over themselves, more or less, right, to lend to a dentist.
Yeah.
Looking at a tool joining us here, runs a fantastic accounting firm and does some great work to help advise accordingly doctors wanting to make these investments, and how do we make it work, and how do I be successful, how do we do it tax efficiently, right? We get involved here on the negotiations of some of the big clauses. And just as Ev was mentioning with interest rates and mortgages, well, same thing for the lease, right? If you're about to sign a lease, and if on average you're in the same location for you or your buyer for 26 and a half years, you've got a ton of leverage. But yes, just like your mortgage, getting the as low as possible price of the lease for base rent, minimizing that annual increase, heck, even a 0.5 or 1% reduction in the annual increase, or a buck of two savings in base rent, the savings can be exponential over that 5, 10, 15-year period. Plus things like CAM. Most doctors don't realize that the common area maintenance, those triple net fees, the surprises we get at the end of the year, are negotiable, right? The HVACs that's got to be replaced for $15,000 is negotiable. Don't just pay 15 grand for a new HVAC when your lease is coming up for renewal in a couple of years. What a beautiful time to have the landlord maybe cover that cost, right? Even if you're not expanding, but you're thinking of renovating. Duncan, you know what? I want to add, you know, a fifth chair into my space, right? Well, again, so many doctors make the mistake of either A, not telling the landlord, and now, right, you're into default of the lease because of the alterations provision. But, right, it also misses out on that negotiation perspective, because, you know, don't just invest 200 grand in a new operatory or two, only to have the lease come up for renewal in a couple of years. The landlord's going to laugh at you, right? Oh, you just spent 100 grand. You're not going anywhere. Here's a 35% rent increase. Have a nice day. So what about if the landlord could help you pay for that new operatory or expansion? They're not going to buy you a chair, of course, but what they can do is, now if you're spending money on the space that is increasing the value of their building, that now we're talking. So what does that mean? If we're blending and extending, we've got the fixturing period. Not uncommon to see 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, maybe even 6 months of time of build out, because, as Duncan mentioned, it's a challenge to open a new clinic. But the landlords know this, and with the proper education about why a dentist needs that period of time is reasonable, or up until the time, if it's Duncan's 120-day fast example, to then start the lease. So fixturing becomes a very big negotiation part, because why are we paying rent before we even opened? And then after you're open, what about free rent? You're signing a 10-year term, which can represent a $500,000 bucks. What a great time to ask for a month or 2 or 3, which the banks love, because it just, as you're ramping up, as you're waiting for your first patients to come through, hey, give me a bit of a break. And that's a neat way that we've backloaded some of these, or given month 1, 2, and 3 of 120 months, right, to save you dramatically as we start. And then tenant improvement allowance. Let's touch on that for a second. I did a CE course not long ago down in Denver, and I cautioned everybody that tenant improvement allowance is sort of like fool's gold. It sounds good, it looks good, right? I'm getting some smiles from Duncan here, right? It looks good. It can be good, because wow, that sounds great. The landlord, the broker said I was going to get 50 bucks a square foot, 100 bucks a square foot. Fantastic. But don't forget, the landlords are not in the lending business. And more importantly, they run into the situation where, especially now with all the costs, if they've got to take a loan to funnel through $100,000 to build out your clinic, you better believe it, you're paying for that into your lease. Let it be the base rent, let it be the annual increase, let it be, even after the 10-year term, that it'll then be the greater of for the next 5 years into year 15 and year 20, right? So,
Yeah,
yeah,
and that's why I smiled, because if you're resetting your base rent higher, they're not giving it back on the renewal, right? So if they're using an interest rate of whatever, prime plus 6 to loan you the money and getting it at prime plus 3, and then you go to renew and you've set your base rent so high. Yeah, I've seen that exact example, and that's why I smiled. Yeah.
yeah. And just being cautious of that. So our usual approach in these sort of scenarios and how to win in again, maximizing your profitability and leverage is hypothetically, hey, Mr. Landlord, what if we took $0 of tenant improvement allowance? How much less could we reduce the base rent? How much less could the annual increase be? How much additional fixturing or free rent could we get? And now, I mean, Jason and I had a client the other day, and it was well over $150,000 difference in terms of increased cost versus the upfront, money, free money from the landlord. So, I mean, just be cautious. You want someone in your corner that's not being paid for by the landlord, because it's a great way of increasing the total financial commitment and therefore the percentage of, right, commissions from it. So our typical guidance is, how do we squeeze each drop of these lemons, and how do we make sure that even through things like landlord work, I can't tell you how many just heartbreaking examples there are of dentists opening up dental or signing leases and then not being able to, or struggling to open up the dental clinic. We've seen condo boards, even doctor that bought a unit, right? They're their own landlord. They own the condo unit, 2,000 square feet. The condo board, 6, 8, 12 months later, refused to let the doctor upgrade from 100 amp to a 200 amp panel for whatever reason. Now the doctor is told he cannot open his 5 operatory clinic that he wanted to. So here he is now 2 years later, still an empty space. So that's a big one. The other one we're seeing a lot more of is coring, right? Not coring, right? Where suddenly now, as we're trying to build out a larger, clinic, 6, 7 operatories, a recent example was, a doctor in 2 units tried to build it out because of where it was located and the structural beams, right? And the thickness on the concrete, wasn't allowed to core anywhere near what she needed to. So now imagine that you're stuck into a lease that can't actually build out a dental clinic. So we share this, right, in terms of your leverage, how important this process is, and how important it is to leverage your leverage through the negotiation. And don't just run to your landlord and say, hey, I'd love the suite next door, because there is a smart way of doing it. So they don't, or the tenant next door doesn't look at you and say, oh, good news, right? I had a doctor the other day that went to the, next door neighbor and said, hey, I'd like to take over your space. Right. And it was a bookstore or something like that. And the owner ran to his wife and said, oh, honey, the dentist next door, we're saved. The dentist next door wants to buy our business. We're going to get $1 million for our business. It's fantastic. The dentist wants to buy our bookstore. No, they don't. Right. So be very careful with that, because go to the landlord, right? Have the proper guidance to go to the landlord to structure in a way. Is there a relocation provision, right? What's the cost implication? Can the landlord move them anyways, right? Because the challenge is you go to your next door neighbor, the falafel house or whatever next candy store, that they're gonna just see dollar signs, right? Because wow, that dentist next door wants to buy me out, right? No, right? We just want your space. Perfect. Jason, anything else to add from your recent examples on these?
Well, yeah, actually, I was thinking about this, in fact, this next slide here, and how it relates to how tenant improvement allowance relates to this. Because as you had said, it's not a free lunch when it comes to tenant improvement allowance. If there's a significant increase in your base rent, what impact does it have on the total financial commitment that you they end up paying at the end of 30 years? So I'll give everyone a minute here to look over this. Guess how much $5,000 a month with 3% annual increases, what does that equate to over a 30-year span? So I'll give everyone 10 seconds.
Zeb staying on mute.
So it's $2.923 million, guys. It's huge. So, you know, while you're in the space, you're gonna see 5K a month. You're gonna see, your lease renewal at 3%, right? Maybe you'd want to take that tenant improvement allowance, even though it bumps your rent up $2 or $3 a square foot. But keep in mind, at the end of your career, when it's time to sell, you would have made a payment of close to $3 million at this point. And frankly, the lower you can keep your base rent at time of sale, the better your practice looks when it comes time to sell, right? So, I mean, that's the name of the game. Eric, anything to add here in this regard?
No, it's bang on. I mean, look, it's I was working with Trish Kinsey recently out of North Toronto and Barrie, and one of the clients we were talking to is, look, when you look at the lease or the proposal or that little letter of intent that you're about to sign on the trunk of a car, right, is what is it? It's a check. It is a check, the largest check that you will send to any entity in your personal and professional life. So one little example here, it's over $3 million. Now, if you say, oh, well, heck, well, I'll just go buy my own. Sure. Right. But two things I'd caution you on. Number one is by buying your own space, you become your own landlord. And now it's up to you to deal with all of the other issues that creep up. Number two is look at the big guys, right? Look at the big DSOs and otherwise, and both in Canada and the US, and look at how many pieces of real estate they own. It's almost nothing. And if they do have any, they're spinning them off because they don't want to own. They want to take that extra dollar and buy another clinic, add another clinic, because the value and the return of having 2 or 4 or 10 or 15 clinics becomes far more valuable, right? Because you've got DDS behind your name, you have the ability to do that, right? Versus anybody can go out and buy the piece of commercial real estate. Also, what we're seeing throughout the country is new associates and or the big guys, the ones they want to buy is ground floor, retail, corner units, lots of natural light, grocery anchored, and those aren't for sale. So those are the big premium types of smart centers in RioCan and those beautiful locations is where the market is demanding. So while you might say, yes, this is, a big number, or yes, I want to buy, be cautious because you have a huge amount of value. And don't forget, this is the value to the landlord. So you can leverage your leverage to negotiate this to be a far better deal. This might only be 2.5 million over the full 30 years. So there's lots of ways of approaching it differently, thinking about it differently, and really putting you into that driver's seat as a great key piece.
Also, I should add here as well as, looking at this overall number, $2.923 million, it certainly sounds like a lot, and it is, right? The flip side of it is if you were to purchase a building, we all know how much real estate is nowadays. If you were to purchase a building now for $2.923 million, over the next 30 years, you need to think about the interest that you'd be incurring as well for your loan, which would, frankly, would be far greater as a monthly payment than $5K a month.
Right.
In the essence of time,
Hmm.
we'll move through here. One big point that I'll make to everybody as a huge one is the biggest and most expensive trap doctors are falling into are not keeping track of critical dates. So the two things to add into your phones this evening are, number one, when does my current lease expire? And the most important is, when is my option to renew deadline date? So the trap that most doctors fall into, if you pop up the last little point, thank you, is, right, most leases, you must notify the landlord in writing or by registered mail at least 12 months prior to the lease renewal, right? That you intend to stay and renew your lease. If you miss that 12-month deadline, because God knows you're not doing anything else all day, right? Those remaining 2 5-year options to renew have just become null and void. And the landlord can put whatever new lease in front of you with whatever demolition clauses, with whatever relocation clauses they want, and completely take your whole transition plan and long-term plan and put whatever rents they want in front of you. So just a big reminder is, be aware of all your critical dates. If you're not sure, find someone, or we'll give you an option at the end on how we can review these for you, track them, proactive reminders, etc. But make sure that you start that process early and often. Let's keep moving, Jay. As I mentioned before, you're the best tenant on the planet. Leverage your leverage. Next one. We touched on this, but again, for those of you that do own already, the messaging here is, do you want to potentially keep your real estate as a passive form of income post-sale? If so, which most do, right? Because who's going to pay, $1 million for your building on top of the $2 million for your clinic? That's a huge investment from a young associate. And if it's a larger corporate buyer, they're not going to want to buy your real estate. So if you are going to need a lease at some point between now and your eventual sale, then no different than your wills and estate planning, heaven forbid, if anything were to happen to you, having a dental specific lease separating your real estate corporation from your practice corporation, critical, right? Duncan, I'm sure you've seen lots of challenges with some of your good clients there.
Yeah, a huge point to make sure that those are in two separate corporations.
Right.
Yeah, had an unfortunate situation with a client passing away and everything being in one, and then his wife having to go through the process, and it just it took forever, a huge strain on her to get all that cleaned up. So the time to start cleaning up is now, even if you're never imagining when you might sell. Do it now.
Yeah, and it's I was sitting in a client's office the other day, and he says, look, it was his former partner had passed away, and he said, look, I never want to put my spouse through it. So he literally gets a practice valuation every 5 years. We created a lease, right? We update the lease every 5 years, and he literally puts it into a box that says, if death, break glass type of thing. And in it is, here's my practice valuation, here's my lease. By the way, make your lease landlord friendly, right? Design it as if you're already the full-time landlord. So many times the doctor makes it tenant friendly because they can, and you're just paying from one pocket to the other. But yes, designing this around, if you sell it to an associate and they turn around and flip it to a DSO, are you okay with the DSO with that nice friendly lease, right? With that nice sweetheart deal. So again, a creation of a lease can be key. Your accountant might say, you know what, we don't necessarily need it for right now, but most as I just did a course with MNP, it's a perfect part of your transition planning, and more so, how do we protect that eventual transition and mitigate some of that liability while increasing the value of your building and your practice. So we'll skip ahead of the next few in terms of some of the key reminders, but really make sure that you know your dates, right? You know your setup. And if you haven't had someone sit down to do that review with you is key. So some great examples. This was one we did recently where this was a secondary location, and we did the first, and there's an unbelievable amount of red flags in the lease that unfortunately most doctors aren't aware of. So this was a perfect situation that we did the first deal, great success. We opened the second location, and I mean, just with a fairly average situation, we were able to secure $100,000 worth of tenant improvement allowance without the rent going up and without any increase or otherwise to the already low rent that we had negotiated. We exceeded 7 months worth of fixturing without any obligation to pay rent. 7 months, right? So $100,000 cash from the landlord plus 7 months rent free. We limited and almost removed almost all the personal liability, which again is something to be cautious of, that just because you did it when you signed your lease originally doesn't mean you still need to be obligated for it 10, 20 years later. We remove the relocation clause that some practice brokerages are actually adding a $350 per square foot reduction to your practice valuation if you have a demolition or relocation clause, because of the risk the buyer is taking to buy your clinic, that they're going to pay you $1 million to sell and then suddenly be kicked out the next day. So removed relocation, made sure there wasn't any demolition or redevelopment clause. We were also, and this is important, the option to renew. You might think, oh, Duncan, I got another 5 years. I've got 12 years left on my lease, right? You don't. You've got 2 years and then 2 5-year options. There was a situation recently where a doctor of Michael Kuttner's actually did a CE course, and one of his clients had 2 years left of term and 2 5-year options, but the options were personal to that original doctor, the selling doctor. So when they tried to go to the bank and they tried to transfer the lease, the 2 options were personal to the selling doctor, right? And so the bank wouldn't approve it. And they went to the landlord. The landlord wanted $100,000 just to transfer the 2 5-year options. No cost, no anything for the landlord, but they wanted $100,000 because they knew the practice deal would die without the options transferred. And Duncan, what do you think the doctor did?
What else is he going to do?
Right? Paid it.
Yeah.
And cringed writing the check, but
Okay.
knew that, hey, it was a $1.5 million sale, and to go through the whole process again, right? If I can't sell it, what's it worth? If I don't have a key, what's it worth? So these are just a tiny little example that it's so much easier to do at the point of expansion, renovation, relocation, etc., to take full advantage of. We'll give us some time for some Q&A. Great conversations thus far. We'll go to Q&A in a second. Jason, yeah.
I had a question that
Please.
kind of, you kind of touched on it, but when the renewal time comes, is it always the right thing just to sign the renewal?
No, that's a great point. Quite frankly, I'd argue the opposite. Because what happens is, let's say, Duncan, you signed a 10-year lease, right? And you've got the 2 5-year options. Well, if you exercise that 5-year option, sort of like my 2 boys, they love Pirates of the Caribbean, right? And walking the gangplank. Well, if you exercise that 5-year option, that's a big step on the gangplank, right? You take one more step for the last 5-year option, and then if you need to sell, you're dangling into the water and the alligators are circling below, right? So no, to your point, Duncan, now every case is unique, but in more cases than not, I say don't exercise your option. You're far better off and more leverage with the landlord to say, no, what about a 10-year term and two 5-year options? Especially if you've got a $750,000 million producing practice today, right? That gives you a huge amount of leverage to now dangle that 10-year term and keep the two 5-year options. So the rule of thumb I typically advise is keep the term for you, keep the two 5-year options for your future buyer, right? So always keep those at the end to avoid what happened to that last doctor. Great point, though. So yeah, in the renewals,
If I can add, actually, if I can add,
please.
if you're looking at it from a different perspective, especially if you're looking to do any kind of expansion, like there's going to be a significant investment into the space, potentially 250K, 500K into the space to, add it up, redo some aspect of the space. It's a perfect time to ensure that you can get your return on investment by negotiating a new 10-year term with some new options.
Yeah, bang on. And the second to last one at the bottom, which is another one that just sends shivers down some doctors' spines, and they say, "What the hell are you talking about, Duncan?" Is in almost all leases, it will state that when you, Duncan, open up a new clinic, if you're to ever leave, you are responsible, whatever it looks like when you walk in, gray shell, right? Wires all over the place, etc., right? No walls, no nothing. You are required to return it to that base shell condition and remove any or all of those leasehold improvements. That could be flooring, that could be walls, maybe even plumbing and electrical, right? You could be, I saw a doctor the other day, at a $25 per square foot fee because he wanted to move his location and the existing landlord in the lease required them to return it back to a pre-dental condition. That's found in the restoration provision in your office lease. So
Yeah, I've seen multiple times that has happened to our clients for sure, where it's an unexpected bill because you're not talking about it 15 or 20 years ago when you signed the lease. You're not thinking about it, and then here comes landlord with a big bill.
Absolutely.
right.
It can
Because
really
who,
surprise you. Yeah.
right?
It's,
Because who's
we had a client recently that they got a bill for 25 grand to restore to tear out everything, including the lead line walls.
Yeah.
And we thought that was the end of it. But to top it off, the landlord at the end of it, they said, "Hey, it's $600 to remove your sign." So
adding insult to injury?
yeah,
So the purpose here, Duncan, you're bang on, right? It's far easier to get this fixed on the earlier stages than it is on the later stages. It's never too late to work to fix this, but if you haven't sold your clinic yet, if you're thinking of going through the process and or just going through a renewal, far easier while you're mid-career than you are towards the end. Skipping ahead, Jason, as we just go to wrap up here. This is a good one actually to reference. This was Dr. Kayhan Alavian in BC, fantastic Sinclair client. This is one that we did the lease negotiation. We moved him across the street. He was out of space, right? He was concerned over the demolition clauses. We were able to get over $870,000 worth of value in return, specifically from not only the financial wins, but also all the improvements to the actual lease, which was a
actually hear it
perfect
from
deal.
himself.
You don't know what you don't know until you realize it. And having someone who's done this before, and it's very valuable because they know exactly what to look for, and they know exactly what they need to do to get the right outcome. We had an initial phone call where we discussed
So, in the
level
essence of time,
offers.
Jason, we can move from there. But yeah, it was key because he used the incredible Sinclair design team to go through the process, had us involved right from the very beginning. And, this was a clause very similar to that lease that was far easier to fix on the intake. And in the essence of time, the high level concern here is that exact example we gave earlier, but the options being personal is right there in the front line. So if you're following along in your lease, literally states that as long as you, Dr. Joe Black, shall remain as the tenant, right? That means the options are good for you. The 2 5-year options are good for you. If you are not, right, those options are not transferable to your future buyer. Also, a little further down, at no event will the rent be less than what you're already paying today. So you're on this ever increasing roller coaster. Talk about inflation, Duncan, right? It keeps going up and up and up. Every 5 years, it goes up and up and up. And no wonder so many doctors, 56% of doctors are overpaying in their office leases today. Next one, again, this was just one other big reminder. Have a read of this. This was a client sent us this. This was from his friend, we thought was his friend, was the landlord, 2 units, and he had only been in a space for 5 years and then got this letter. And as you can quickly see, this poor doctor missed his option to renew deadline by 3 days and got this love note from his landlord that basically said, you didn't send your notice in, therefore your remaining 2 5-year options are null and void, and literally sent his broker in and put a for lease sign in this new clinic's window. All the staff walk in the next day and say, what, doc, are we going somewhere? What's going on? So, and then, at the bottom, if you do want to stay, no problems. Have your people call my people, right?
Well.
At a 22% rent increase. So again, I share this because we see these every single day, and we just know that it's a self-inflicted wound. So these are just some good news tonight, guys. Zev, we're going to be here all night. We're going to go through each and every one of these clauses in nauseam, and can't wait to go through each of these and show all of the financial impact for you. I think Zev just dropped off.
Yeah, I cannot wait.
Just kidding. But guys, look, these are just some of the clauses that if you don't know what they are negotiable, and they can have a massive impact to your business. Next one, Jay. So to summarize, the solution here is start early, start often, right? 24 months is typically the sweet spot to start the lease renewal process. Now, don't go in blind, because you call up your landlord tomorrow, the last thing they're going to do is, I'm golfing. It's too soon. Mercury isn't aligned with Venus right now. Come back in 6 months. Right. And they're going to hope that you forget about these. So you want to have a process, you want to have an approach, and you want to think it like a carefully choreographed game of chess. What does that chess game look like? On the next slide, over doing this for 30 years, the first is get the data. I can't tell you how many doctors do not have a lease that's signed by them and the landlord, which is not worth the paper it's written on. So make sure that you have that original lease, as Duncan mentioned, back from 35 years ago, because that's the governing document that will dictate if you can sell your clinic, or if you can make changes, or if you have to return it all back to pre-dental condition. Number 2 is figure out those goals, right? When do you want to transition? What's your production? What's your production per chair? What's keeping you up at night, right? What are the issues within the space? God, the security is an issue, right? We're it's nothing but challenges. We had leaks. We had to shut down. We had to close an operatory, right? Figure out those goals. Right. Number 3 is have your lease reviewed. If you don't know where the risks are, at least know, right? Doesn't mean you have to do something today, but it does mean that at least you can be aware of the risks and then plan accordingly and assess them to your business. The data Jason mentioned, if you're not sure what your rental rates are, vacancies, comp reports, etc., start with that. If you don't think you're paying fair market rent, you're probably not. And your leverage, again, if you were to leave, most landlords are anywhere from 6 to 18 months of what they call months on market, which is if you were to leave, how long would that for lease sign stay up? That's how much it's worth you to keep you. And then lastly, figure out what that game of chess looks like. So please don't walk into your clinic tomorrow, pick up the phone, because what haven't I done yet? Right? I haven't picked up the phone. So all of that is before the very first communication to the landlord. Then negotiate the rent, then negotiate all the clauses, and don't stop until you get to a final form lease that you're satisfied with. That's both signed by you and the landlord. And one last piece on that, Duncan, super shady. Did all the back and forth, 6 months worth of back and forth. At the 11th hour, after the landlord agreed to remove the relocation and demolition provisions, had then sent the final version to the doctor to sign via DocuSign. And then the doctor said, well, that's a little weird. Sent it back to us to compare. We did a full side-by-side comparison. Lo and behold, guess what found its way back in?
Yeah.
Like, just nuts. So, look, I share this because we get pretty passionate about it. And then secondarily is it's a wild world out there, and it is important to make sure that you've got all the strategies, tactics to win, because you are the best tenant, you're making major investments, and you should have a lease to support that. So lastly, we'll pull up the exit poll, and in appreciation for everyone's time, and of course for certainly Duncan and Zev, we appreciate all the support. For all the Sinclair clients, we waive our $2,000 fee for the full demographic rental rate analysis, and obviously full lease review. So what we do is help to ensure we know clearly what is within the lease. So we'll do a Teams call such as this. We'll share our screens. We'll go through line by line and literally show you examples where your lease will be very similar, if not identical, to some of the clauses we shared today. In addition, let's find out what market rents looks like. Let's compare to other let it be general dental deals or other comparables in the market to your specific building. And how do we help to make sure we have that and a great strategy? As we go to Q&A in a second for Duncan, Zev, myself, and Jason here, right? The last piece I really wanted to share is, look, the last 5 years of being a business owner, let alone a dental business owner, has been brutal. And if nobody's pat you on the back to go through COVID, right? Staffing issues, interest rates, right? And change amongst all changes, it is remarkable that each and every one of you are still here, and more importantly, now thinking about growth. So, I say that because with all the tax changes and how difficult it is being a business owner here in this great country of ours, and how we get taxed to death, that's an aside. It's a great opportunity to, again, reflect back and realize you're not alone in all of this, right? Duncan, with 35 years worth of experience, has seen it all, done it all. Zev and any of the member of the team across the country is key, right? You've got lots of resources. We'll do things on a free basis to share these best practices to help make sure that you're getting the best deal, you're having the best long-term profitability, and most importantly, you're not signing anything without clearly knowing what the risks are, and more importantly, how to squeeze every drop out of that lemon. So on that note, I thank each of you through it, and we'll open it up to some questions and Q&A.
We've had one person ask, are building permits needed to expand into an adjacent unit, or is landlord agreement enough?
Good one. So Duncan, maybe, or Zev, actually, I think that was your example. You're seeing a ton of these. I'm happy to touch on some of the permitting and those things, but maybe in generality, Zev or Duncan, what would you share in terms of what to do and what not to do as dealing with expansions into the next door units?
Yeah, that's a situation that's going to require a building permit, 99.9999%. I don't know what the exception
Yeah.
be,
Absolutely.
but that's gonna be a building permit. And we don't own any contractor. We don't have any investment in any contracting company, but hire a good contractor. They'll guide you through a lot of that. We can also give a lot of guidance on that, but expanding in particular, trying to integrate into your existing infrastructure while not having downtime. I think that's somewhere where you want somebody with a little bit of experience doing that job for you.
Yeah.
Jeff?
And the building permits are going to kind of catch new things that are necessary in that building or up to date bylaw, or what is the word I'm looking for. But anyways, the biggest issue we've come across is the HVAC systems. The new HVAC systems that are required when you build or expand are getting the supply of it from the US has been the biggest holdup in most of the last couple of bills that we've done over the last few years. So yes,
Yeah,
the building permits are necessary. Yeah.
that comes back to the Energy Code of Canada and that being enforced in most municipalities now. We won't get into the technicalities of that, but all the more reason to get a building permit. Yeah.
Yeah, and for sure. And I'll touch on it from the landlord side and say, there is the leverage, etc. But good and great contractors. I just did one with Trish Kinsey here in Toronto, and the contractor went above and beyond to actually go, even at the first walkthrough, to go to the local town hall to validate zoning, to double check on any open permits, etc. And very quickly you can tell what the issue is. And yes, you don't want to run the risk with a hundreds of thousands of dollars investment. We're not talking about a shed that you're building in the back with your brother-in-law. This is your business, and if it doesn't come to bite you now, it can come to bite you down the line. Which brings us to another good point is, Duncan, Zev, we see a lot of expansions and saying, you know what, I can get some, again, I've got my brother's cousin builds cabinets and said they'd build some custom cabinets for me versus, gosh, those big expensive ADEC ones, etc. As they're contemplating furniture, right, and the all ends of the spectrum, what guidance or best practices can you share in terms of pros and cons that you've seen from those that just do the custom non-dental specific, cabinet builder versus going all the way up to a, ADEC removable type solution?
Sure. Resale value comes into that. Obviously, when you have a name brand product sitting there with a serial number, but financially upfront, then you can write it off differently because it's a piece of equipment versus leaseholds. There's so much that goes into that discussion, but know that there's more options in all the spectrum of the price range from high to low in your furniture choices for your operatories and for your sterilization area, and have that discussion with your sales rep. They can guide you through that. Thank you, Eric. Yeah.
Yeah, it's another good point is the lease can be key. It's very nice to ensure that the landlord can't try to, we just did a Sirius University course on it recently, internally, where the landlord can have options to it. So Jason, on your screen there, you can unshare, but other questions, guys. The other piece in terms of expansions, in terms of any other changes, Jason, anything we missed in terms of good, bad, or ugly there?
Well, I was thinking about that last question. Are building permits needed, or is a landlord agreement enough? Well, I was thinking about this, in terms of the lease and your obligations to the landlord whenever you want to do any sort of change to your space, regardless if it's expanding to adjacent unit or maybe you're renovating in your space. It's very important to take a look at what your individual lease has in store for you. They're all, let's put it this way, they're all like fingerprints. They're all unique in their own way. I've seen it where certain leases are extremely friendly, where if you wanted to paint the walls pink, you could. And there's other ones where it indicates, anything, absolutely anything. If you want to change the curtains on the windows, you need to get permission from the landlord, which many times the landlord's permission, they may simply say no, right? So very important to review that prior to making any kind of plan to renovate a space or otherwise.
Perfect. Great. Well, on that note, I know we're a few minutes over. Duncan, thank you so much for your time. Zev, again, thank you for joining and sharing some of the best practices. It's an incredible time to make the investment, or quite frankly, even better, just get the data, right? You don't have to go down the path to do the full expansion or second clinic, but it is a nice opportunity to invest the time and the resources to find out what that looks like, to find out how actually reasonable and inexpensive it may be, but at least to give you the data to make the right decisions. So on that note, appreciate your time. Thank you very much for Sinclair for sponsoring today's event. Thank you, Duncan. Thank you, Zev. We'll see you next week, and have a fantastic weekend. And thank you very much for attending, everybody.
All right, good night, everyone.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Thanks, Eric.
Cheers, guys.